Hey guys, it's Alex the Real Mr. Robinson. So I decided to do something a little different. We got Pacific Rim Uprising coming out this weekend, and I figured, why not take a look back at the original Pacific Rim? I reviewed this movie when it came out 5 years ago in theaters, but you know what, 5 years is a long time. How has this movie sat over that time? Has my opinion changed on it? Do I still feel about it the way I do? Well, let's dive into it. Pacific Rim came out in 2013, is directed by Guillermo del Toro, stars Charlie Hunnam, Idris Elba, Charlie Day, Rinko Kikuchi, and Ron Perlman. The movie takes place in a world where giant monsters not only come out of the ocean and destroy cities, but they've come out of a portal called the Breach. Strange, but I've been willing to let a lot of bizarre things go in the Godzilla series, so I'm not going to complain about this. But anyway, it's a really cool setup. Monsters keep coming out of the breach, the world keeps destroying them, but monsters keep coming out, and it's an ongoing cycle. So over time, humanity decides, you know what, let's just build giant robots called Jaegers to defend ourselves from these giant monsters, which we've dubbed kaiju, which, if you don't know, is Japanese for monster. And Jaeger is German for hunter. So as the years go on, more Jaegers are being developed, kaiju are becoming more prominent and more intelligent, and because of the creation of the Jaegers, it becomes like an everyday thing. Kaiju emerges from the breach, oh, no big deal, we'll just send in a Jaeger to come in, punch it in the face repeatedly, and it'll die. Easy peasy. However, over the years, the kaiju have become more intelligent, and they've braced themselves for Jaeger attacks. So the movie actually takes place during the last few days of the war, where General Pentecost, played by Idris Elba, gathers up the last few remaining Jaegers, pulls one of their old pilots, played by Charlie Hunnam, out of retirement in a last-ditch effort to try to stop the kaiju and destroy the breach for good. When this movie came out in 2013, I fell in love with it because it was a giant monster movie. I hadn't seen a big giant monster movie like this since maybe Godzilla Final Wars, and it ended up being number 2 on my best of list. That's right, number 2. And I've said a couple of times that 2013 was just an incredibly mediocre year for movies. That's why it ended up being where it was on my best of list, because I just love giant monsters. So 5 years have gone by. Does the movie hold up? Is it still as amazing as I remembered it to be back then? Yes and no. Look, let me say this. I love Guillermo del Toro. I mean, I absolutely adored The Shape of Water. I think he's an incredible director, mainly when it comes to visuals, and when he's really working with great material, like with Shape of Water or Pan's Labyrinth, when it truly comes from his imagination, it works. And Pacific Rim very much does come from Guillermo del Toro's imagination. But when Pacific Rim is bad, it's really bad. One thing I remember specifically about Pacific Rim on repeated viewings is that some of the acting is not very good at all. And we know Guillermo del Toro can work very well with actors, except I think with Pacific Rim, he was more focused on this being a giant monster mash than actually devoting time to some of the other details. Because your lead actor, Charlie Hunnam, is such a dud. I don't remember what I said about him in my original review for Pacific Rim, but rewatching it for this updated review, he is just so uncharismatic, so uninteresting, and half of his dialogue is delivered as if he's narrating for a trailer. If you watch all the trailers and the opening narration for Pacific Rim, and then you watch some other scenes where he's speaking to characters, he speaks in the exact same monotone tone as if he was narrating a trailer, and you're just like, this is our main character that we're supposed to care about? I mean, he's not unlikable, but he's just not interesting. If anything, Idris Elba should have been the main character of the film, because Idris Elba is always charismatic, but his character, General Pentecost, actually has a little bit of backstory that kind of intrigues you. He was once a Jaeger pilot who has since retired and became a general, basically commanding all the other Jaeger pilots. But before I completely segue into the good stuff, I want to keep focusing on the bad stuff, because another thing that I really did not like watching this movie again are the pilots for Striker Eureka, which is the Australian Jaeger. The reason I have a problem with these two actors is because they are not Australian, and when you watch the movie, they have these incredibly fake Australian accents, and you're like, God, what the the hell is this? There is a good chunk of this movie where it's asking you to take what's going on seriously, and with the world that it established, I can be willing to let go of my suspension of disbelief and go along with its tone. But anytime these two actors pop up, and anytime they even open their mouths, it's laughable. Also, the movie lags like crazy in the middle. Once we get past the opening title sequence, which is about 17 minutes into the movie, the rest of it is pretty much set up and exposition until we get into the big final assault on the breach to stop the kaiju from coming into Earth. Which I would be fine with if the characters were the least bit interesting. Like I mentioned beforehand, your lead, Charlie Hunnam, is a complete block of wood, and the two fake Australians are just kind of laughable whenever they're on. You can't take them seriously. And one of them is a completely unlikable prick that you're just wondering, why are you here? Nobody in their right mind would ever put up with you, and the only reason why you're even here is because your dad's a pilot himself, and he's good friends with the general. I did have a personal issue with setting this story in the final days of the war, but that's just me going on the whole, this is what I would have done if I made Pacific Rim, or this is how the movie should have been. But I'll admit, that's a personal problem for me, and it's not fair criticizing the movie on a personal issue, because if I've learned anything from The Last Jedi, you should not criticize a movie just because it wasn't what you thought it should be in your mind. It's either you take it or you leave it. While I would have done something a little different in terms of the story, Guillermo del Toro did a fantastic job of making it feel at least grand and epic, which I guess is a fantastic way to segue into the stuff that I did love about this movie, because on a whole, the positives really outweigh the negatives. I love the setup. I love the world that Guillermo del Toro has built, and all the rules that he's established when creating these Jaegers. Basically, you have two pilots who are mentally linked to each other through the drift. That way, their actions can control this giant Jaeger, because one pilot alone can pretty much get killed trying to control a Jaeger on his own, or her own. And the designs for all the kaiju and the Jaegers are pretty cool. The Jaegers themselves have some really goofy names like Gypsy Danger, Striker Eureka, Cherno Alpha, Crimson Typhoon. But you know what? The idea of giant monsters and giant robots is goofy enough already, so why not? And the special effects on all these creatures are pretty damn impressive. With the Jaegers especially, you get to see all the little intricate details that go into them as they're moving around. And one thing I also really love is Del Toro's attention to detail when it comes to the monsters and the robots moving, because they move really slowly, but it's not slow-mo like you see in a Zack Snyder movie. It's there to demonstrate how massive these things are, because the bigger they are, the slower they're going to move, and it really plays out like a Godzilla movie. It feels authentic that these giant creatures and these giant mechs would move as slowly as they are. I think I'm probably more forgivable on the fight scenes than other people. I'll admit I would have liked to see more fight scenes that take place in the daytime, because every single fight scene in this movie takes place at night and in the rain, and the big finale of the movie takes place underwater, which even in the Godzilla series, I've never been a fan of underwater fights. But with all the action scenes, I can make out what's going on. The camera is positioned in a way where you can see everything clearly. There's no close-up shots. You really get the sense of scope of these monsters fighting, and Del Toro really brings in a lot of great visual looks that just make the movie a lot more beautiful. And because he has a great visual style, all the colors pop, and there's just a lot of imagination and creativity that goes into all the monster fight scenes. I love the music. I can never figure out how to pronounce his name, but he's the same composer for Iron Man and Game of Thrones. The score for Pacific Rim that he does here is phenomenal, and I love all the different styles that he uses for both the kaiju and the Jaegers. Now, I know some of you are watching this video and thinking, oh, well, unless there's a giant robot or a giant monster on screen, the movie was boring to you. And that's not 100% true. Again, I'll admit that there is a good chunk of the movie that lags, but there are some characters that I do like. There are some story elements that I do like. I already talked about Idris Elba and how he's a lot more compelling than Charlie Hunnam, but Rinko Kikuchi is really good as well. She plays the assistant to General Pentecost, Mako Mori. She's really good. She has a lot of backstory to her that is linked to Idris Elba's character. and she's the one you feel the most sympathy towards. And again, next to Idris Elba, she's the best actor, and she's the most likable character of the entire group. So anytime the movie is focused on these two characters, I was actually compelled. And then I do like some of the other side characters. I really like Clifton Collins Jr.'s here, who I think is a really underrated actor. He's so out there, and he really does bring a lot to his roles, as minor as they are. One of my favorite roles was when he was in Crank 2 as this crazy, insane Mexican drug lord who's just so over the top, and he's very charming in this movie. The two scientists, on the other hand, I could see people having problems with them, especially Charlie Day, who's just pretty damn annoying. And if there were any characters that I wish weren't coming back in Pacific Rim Uprising, it would be these two. But there were some moments where they made me laugh. When they realized that the big plan is not going to work unless they follow specific rules, Charlie Day just moves one guy over and says, "Get out of the way, you fascist!" And it's just so quick, you'll miss it at the snap of a finger, but it made me laugh watching it a second time. And then Ron Perlman, he's Ron Perlman. I don't know what else to say about him. He's weird, but Guillermo del Toro knows how to utilize him. And there is one gag with him at the end of the movie, after the credits roll, that did make me laugh. So he is what he is, and this movie is ultimately what it is. It's one of those take it or leave it movies. I would say it's a more inventive and more imaginative version of Independence Day, because a lot of people back in the 90s loved Independence Day, and I like it in terms of it being a big budget B movie from the 1950s. And I would say the same thing for Pacific Rim. It's a big budget version of a giant monster movie from Japan, and I like this better because I grew up with the Godzilla series, for one thing. But also, there's just a lot more imagination and creativity put into Pacific Rim than I think there was for Independence Day. So again, when Pacific Rim is bad, it's pretty bad, but when it's good, it's really good. So I'm going to ultimately say that it's a good movie. It's not a great movie at all. If I could look back at my original review, I might end up going, what was I thinking? But that being said, I love the monster fight scenes, I love the visual look for it, and I do like Idris Elba and Rinko Kikuchi, but the middle of the movie, Charlie Hunnam, the two fake Australians, I could really do without. There's a lot to like about this movie, but there's definitely a lot to criticize. And also, I give this movie credit for being the movie that brought up this resurgence and this reinterest in giant monsters, because we've had the American Godzilla, Toho has revived Godzilla, we have a new Kong movie, so there's a lot of interest in giant monster movies again, and I thank Pacific Rim for that entirely. So again, it's one of those movies where it's either your thing or it's not your thing. And that's my updated review for Pacific Rim. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. Check out my review for Pacific Rim Uprising in the next few days. And until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.